Hello and welcome back to the CyberSoc Podcast. I'm Ryan.
I'm Adam.
Adam, I'm hoping you've started your project for me this week.
Oh, I thought you'd have forgotten about this, Ryan.
Of course not.
Okay, well, no, and
Right.
I have no good excuse for it. I just like to be honest. But the world isn't full of fairy tales. Sometimes Adam doesn't do his work.
Adam, come on now, you've had a whole week to start this project. What have you been doing?
I tell you what I have just been doing, Ryan.
Okay.
I've set off on a quest by you to complete the Advent of Code challenge.
Yes, I know exactly what you've been doing, and for you, it's the perfect excuse not to do work.
Oh,
But
it is excellent. Now, for those who aren't aware, it's every day of the Advent, they release another little coding challenge. There's two parts to it. You've got to get the first part to unlock the second. And Ryan decided that he would spice it up for us by making us do a new language every day. So the first day, I wasn't aware of it until like about 1 a.m. when Ryan messaged me, and he did it himself in Node. I've yet to do that first one, but the second one we did yesterday, we both did it in Python. And today, I decided...
For some obscure reason, Adam, you've decided to use maybe the worst language I've ever used today.
a language called Racket. Now, I mean, to be clear, I decided to use it because there was a repository of other people who have completed this challenge. They're tracking it every day, and they did Racket for the first couple challenges. So that was new. So I gave it a Google, and it's how would you describe it, Ryan?
It says that the Racket language is multi-paradigm, right? But to me, it just seems very functional. For me, I find it extremely hard to understand it in my brain.
Yes, so it's using the scheme dialect of Lisp, which I didn't know before this, but you have your what's it called? What's the word?
What word are you looking for?
It's not in any of my things. The first word, like look, okay, I'm going to run the program and get the error.
Adam, you've fallen apart.
The identifier, right? You put the identifier at the start. So instead of like 4 plus 2, you would actually have plus 2 and then 4, right? And all of this is inside some brackets. Which kind of makes sense in my brain. So Ryan's actually looking at the code that I've got for my the third day. And I
can see it and no one else can, but that's fine.
Yes, well, podcast and all that. It kind of makes sense, so that there's like a command, and then there's the two things you put after it, or the inputs, and that does kind of make sense to my brain. But when you have a lot going on, there is an awful lot of brackets, and that gets very confusing, I think.
It's all brackets, isn't it? Everything's in brackets.
It's all brackets, and brackets are actually very hard when they're all the same brackets, and they instead of like the curly brackets, the curly braces, one would use to denote a for loop, for example. It's all the same brackets as one would use to call a function or anything like that. So it's all very difficult to understand when it gets long.
Yeah, because I've been trying to do it in Racket today, and it just doesn't make sense in my brain. I think maybe my brain only naturally thinks of problems in a very procedural way, right? And thinking of it as all like these functions like this, the syntax to me is just insane. I cannot make sense of it in my brain, Adam, and it's upset me actually that I can't do it.
I mean, I think it took some getting used to. I mean, how long? You've not been going on. You've done it for like an hour or something, have you? Just before now?
Yeah. So maybe if I, worked on it a bit longer, maybe something would come of it. And if I tried to learn Racket properly, rather than what I'm doing, which is not that, but
yeah, I mean, I started it at 12 o'clock, and we're supposed to record this podcast at 2. I started at 12 trying to get this done because I was thinking it wouldn't be too hard. Get it done before the podcast, have a quick chat about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had to message Ryan at 2 to say we're going to have to delay the podcast because I've not got anywhere near it. And it's still, here we are at 3 o'clock. So 3 hours after I decided to start.
Still unsolved.
Still unsolved. It's mostly, so I'm going to talk Ryan through the code. What I've got at the moment, I'm reading it in, and I've done that nicely. I'm mapping it to a list. So each item is, I should actually explain the problem here. You're given a text file with every line a new 12-bit binary number, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to work out how much ones appear in the first column, how many ones appear in the second column, etc. for all the columns to find out if more ones or zeros appear in each column. That an adequate explanation?
Absolutely.
So I'm reading in, each binary number is a list. I count the number of lines and I count the length of the binary numbers. So, 12 digit. So all good. That's this top bit. Here then, I'm working out how to find the nth number in the list. So, because Racket doesn't seem to have an inbuilt function to deal with this, I've created a function called nth. It takes a list and the counter, and it returns the counter. It returns the item in the list, so it just indexes the list, essentially. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Now, all I need to do now, this last bit, is I'm just effectively adding all the lists together. So I have an array here, which is 12 digits long, and for each binary number, I'm adding that to the array. So the first digit in the array will house the number of ones in the first index of all of the binary numbers. Is this making sense as an explanation?
Well, an explanation, yes. But when I look at what you've written in Racket, absolutely not.
I think it looks fairly reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
But I've spent the last hour trying to add arrays together and I can't do it at all, and I feel just mad. Because that should be so simple.
Well. I know. I'm wondering if this just isn't a problem for Racket. I was looking at some of the other examples of people who've written this in Racket. I can only find one Racket example though today. I don't know if that's the one you've seen as well.
I've not looked. I thought it would be cheating, so I've not looked.
Right, but there is a Racket example out there for today, and it's just so long. And I've looked at it, and none of it makes sense to me. I understand, maybe it's because I don't know Racket. But it's just nonsensical to me. Usually I can look at a programming language that that's because most of the time they are quite similar to each other, right? It's just very small things that aren't the same between languages. So, but looking at Racket, that's not how I feel. It's just, it means nothing to me looking at the code.
I think I can understand. I think I can understand what I've written. I can understand. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. The blue is the identifier, and then the red stuff are the operators, or not the operators. Sorry, what I'm passing into it.
Yeah.
But so I think most languages, or I thought before this, most people can do most languages because you just get stuck in and you'll find your way around it. If you encounter a problem, you can Google it and find the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Racket has some level of adoption. Clearly, there are some people who are using it. But if you're trying to find, for instance, trying to add two arrays together, which feels like a very simple problem, I cannot find a resource online that even vaguely gets anywhere near it. There is so little people using it.
Yeah.
That it becomes quite difficult.
And that's always a problem when you're using, a programming language that is less well known than some of the other ones. It's going to be so hard to find resources and help for that language,
Yeah.
And this is the first language I've used in, the Lisp/Scheme family. And trying to find help for Racket, I'm finding is not very easy. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to abandon Racket. We should not be spending, 3 hours on one challenge. This should be a fast little thing that you do, and that's it. Half an hour,
so
maybe
close.
max, and
Just
then done.
so close.
But you've not even reached part 2 yet, so you're not close, really.
But what I liked was I found, because the way I'm solving the problem by adding all the arrays together would mean that the first index of the array would be a count of all the ones in it. So I could divide that by the total number of items in the array, and if it's greater than 50%, then I'd know that there was more ones than there were zeros, which I thought was quite a neat solution. Mm-hmm. Rather than counting them all out individually.
I mean, I've abandoned Racket for today, Adam. It's
yeah.
I wanted to do it, and it's upset me that I'm abandoning it, but I can't spend hours. I can't spend the whole day today just trying to work out Racket. So I've actually solved it in Python in 5 minutes.
Yes. How have you looked at part 2 then?
I haven't gone to part 2 yet because you wanted to record this podcast, so I'll be doing it after.
Yeah, but, I mean, because I think I could, with more time, figure out part 1 and possibly some Stack Overflow questions that I ask, but I can't imagine expanding this to part 2.
Yeah, maybe for second part.
It upsets me because I want to do a new language every day.
Well, I think we've just started on maybe one of the worst ones we could have started on. I don't want to offend any Racket lovers out there.
There definitely isn't any.
But this just is such an alien language to me. Looking at it, it means nothing. I cannot understand it in my brain. Maybe I'm just stupid at it. I don't think I am though. But
no, I mean, a reason that I thought it would be easier than it is we use a tool called GitHub Copilot.
We do.
Do you want to go for the explaining of that one, or should I?
So it's just I think they advertise it as an AI-assisted programmer, right? That will pair with you is how they kind of promote it. Is the idea behind it?
Yeah.
But actually, what it just will auto-complete your lines for you as you code.
And I think it's even more powerful than that. You can write a comment saying, read the file in line by line and run a function on each line. And then it will write the code that does that. All you need to do is write the comment and it will do it. Although there's an asterisk to that.
I find in the wild though, I only really use it for just simpler kind of things rather than writing a massive function for me or something,
Yeah. Yes. I think that's probably a more sensible way of using it because, as we've found, and I tried to rely on Copilot for the start of coding with Racket, and I did you do that as well?
Yep, and was not working out for me at all.
Disastrous results.
The code it was producing for Racket, just it wasn't working. It just the syntax was completely wrong.
Yeah. I often found that it was trying to use things that were libraries that needed to be imported, or sometimes you just needed to write an entire function yourself. It called so this nth function that I've got here came about because I typed in Copilot, find the index of this list right? And it used this function called enth. And I looked at it and thought, okay, well, maybe this is a library I need to import. No, there was no such library. I needed to write this enth function myself. I just copied it from a Stack Overflow. But clearly what happened is Copilot, which is like an AI machine learning tool that Microsoft ran on all the GitHub code base. Clearly someone that wrote stuff in Racket used this enth function, and picked that up, but didn't pick up the fact that I needed an enth function to run it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm assuming it's because Racket is not as popular as some other languages, so it has less to learn from. Because when I've been using it in like PHP or JavaScript, pretty much all the time it will be spot on. But that being said, though, even in the popular languages like that, occasionally it will still produce something that's just, nonsensical. It happens even with popular languages. I suppose that's the problem with using an AI programmer like this, right? It's not always going to be right.
I've seen reports of like academic reports of looking at it, and I think the figure was 40% of the code Copilot produces could be exploited in some way.
Okay.
So I think it requires you to have like a fair eye on what's going on. We used it yesterday. I was writing some Python, and it filled in a function for me, and it turned out that it interpreted it wrong, and it caused a bug that I had to go and fix.
Mm-hmm. So it still happens in like your more popular languages. You still might have to fix the things that it produces for you. I find I only really use it for like simple things that I would say normally I would look up a Stack Overflow article of how to do. I can usually entrust that the Copilot algorithm will work it out correctly for me, rather than me manually going to Stack Overflow. I only use it for small things. I would never trust it to write like, a complicated algorithm type thing for me, really. It's for simple things is what I use it for.
I think there's also like some legal questions on writing a large function. I've seen people talking about if this code has been taken from what they call copyleft sources. So that's the like GTPT v3 licenses that say if you use or a significant chunk or some part of this code, you have to make sure your license is also permitting other people to copy it. It's open source, etc. Mm-hmm. So at what point if you use a lot of Copilot code auto-completion, actually should your code fall under an open source license because you're probably using other people's open source code?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is something I've seen a lot of as well. I don't know what the answer to this is. It's a very new problem, right?
Yeah.
I mean, for me personally, I don't think it's an issue because I only really use it to like, if I need to read from a file or like looping through an array or something, or just like some kind of simple kind of thing just to auto-complete like the line that I probably could type out anyway manually.
Yeah.
I don't use it for like, big complicated methods. And if it did produce one of those, I might think, where has this come from? I don't know. It's an interesting thing though, because it's a new problem.
Yeah, because I imagine if, you're working for a large company and you as just an individual developer could be using Copilot, and then, that this larger company wouldn't know, right?
Yeah.
That what you're doing is possibly like legally dubious.
I assume Microsoft must have like resolved these legal issues internally. Like they must be happy that this is fine, right? Otherwise they wouldn't have released it.
Yeah, probably.
So
I mean, presume that they use it internally.
I assume Microsoft is fine with it, which means it must be fine to use, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's because I don't. I've never published anything for commercial purposes or anything, but I don't take into account the licenses of any libraries I use.
No, well, me neither.
Because they potentially have the same kind of copyleft. It needs to be open source if you use this library licenses.
I mean, the majority of things you'll use will just let you freely use them however you want to, right?
Yeah.
So, I
think you might have to be careful if someone was really looking at... then again, I don't know how they'd know.
No, and I'm not, a lawyer, so I can't answer that question for you, really. But, I mean, I assume the packages that are, the popular ones, they're all going to allow you to use their software however you want, pretty much.
Yeah.
The ones that aren't allowing that probably aren't going to be as popular because they don't let you use it however you want. So
yeah, I suppose so.
I don't know. It raises some interesting questions on like where it's headed as well. Like, will we be able to, just speak what we want, what we want our like web app to be like with like the logic or something, and the AI will just produce all of the code for us? Because this is like AI assisted, right? It's not AI produces it all for you.
Yeah, I think I've seen...
But are we headed that way?
I think I've seen something akin to you can describe how you want the UI of a website to look, and it will produce the CSS for you in just natural English. I can't remember, but I think we're getting close to that kind of reality.
You go.
No, you go.
I was just wondering how you would feel with, just speaking everything you want the code to be, and the AI will just produce it all for you.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it could be a better world, right? Reducing like human error and all that problems that you get, and also increasing uniformity, right? If everyone solves a problem the same way because it's not them who are solving the problem, it's this AI, that's nice to maintain it. But then again, if there is a vulnerability in the way this AI solves a problem, everything is possibly vulnerable to it if they use the same software to create it.
I also feel like it wouldn't always be the same type of stuff that the AI produces, though, right? Because it's learning from the code that isn't. It's not all just from one place that it learns. It learns from the code that like millions of people have written. So what it produces might not actually be the same all the time.
Maybe I'm assuming that it can learn how everyone else has done it, and then it will find the best way to read in from a file.
Do you think?
Yeah, I'm assuming if you say read in from a file, it will do that the same way because it's come to a conclusion.
I don't know. I think the vulnerability point is stronger because if you have to trust the AI to produce the right answer, the most secure answer.
Yeah. But then again, I suppose, I think humans are probably equally, if not more, vulnerable to creating these problems. It's just the problems humans create will be more diverse. If you find the problem that the AI would have created, it's possibly everywhere. Rather than something a human created, it's probably just on that one service.
Yeah, so I think probably the AI assisted programming is like the better way to do it, as opposed to like full AI kind of solution,
Yeah. I mean, it'd be an exciting time to see.
It would be strange though, because then like, what is the point of software engineers if AI is writing all the code? Especially if you could just speak your code, then potentially anyone would be able to do that. You don't have to be a programmer to do that.
You think job security is scary for you here?
Well, potentially. I know there's people, people who work on the machine learning side of things, and there's people who have to maintain like all that too. But if I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think I think societally we should strive to a more of a post-work world, right? I mean, no one enjoys being forced to do work just to pay the bills. And if there is no such thing as work, then you can do all you can fulfill whatever you want to do, right? And most of what you buy and what you see is labour cost, right? Mm-hmm. So if you remove that cost because it's not done by things you need to pay, they're just done by robots, things will become much cheaper.
Yeah. I mean, I see your point. But
there'll be a painful transition time when some people have jobs and some people don't.
I don't know what my thoughts on it are, to be honest. I don't know if I'm for or against it. There's like pros and cons to both sides, Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's the middle bit that we've been getting to since the Industrial Revolution, right? We've been moving towards automating these things.
And you'd still have to have people to program the automation.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I like where it is right now, though, with this AI-assisted programming. I hope that can be developed further, because I think that's a strong place to be right now. Because when I use these AI-assisted programming type of tools, I find that you can work so much faster than before.
Yeah, I think it makes you a better developer.
Yes. And it's like that, not having to switch to like Stack Overflow to look up something. You can just stay within one place and the AI will produce the answer for you. That's just a nice way to live, I feel, and to work.
Yeah, and I think it allows you to be able to switch between languages much faster.
Mm-hmm.
Because often I don't remember how to do reading in a file, right? Excellent example. I couldn't be able to do that off the top of my head for any language.
Yeah, so it's nice to like have the code be written for you for that automatically.
Yeah.
Because that type of thing there that you've just described, like reading from a file, that is something you would have to look up every time in every language that you use, basically. Because it's not something you experience very often, reading from a file.
Yeah.
And you want to make sure you're doing it the right way. And the syntax for it in each language is not at all similar most of the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good point. I want to lead on from our talk about Racket earlier, Adam.
Yeah.
Because Racket is very functional, I feel, even though it's not apparently. Apparently it's multi-paradigm. That is not what I experienced, though, today. But
I can't imagine doing OOP in it, but it says it's capable of it, so who knows?
Is that what it says, is it? Gosh.
Yeah, it says object-oriented.
Well, I saw a video today of someone from Fireship. Have you watched like the Fireship videos before? I think I've sent some to you, actually. So you have.
Well, maybe I've forgotten. I'll give it a Google.
They just like produce a lot of videos about software engineering type topics. And I saw that they uploaded a video about unpopular opinions in software engineering, and they were reacting to some of these opinions. So one of the first unpopular opinion in the video was that OOP, or object-oriented programming, is bad. And this is an opinion I've like seen around on the web,
I think I've given you this opinion personally.
Have you?
Yes. Last year I watched a video that was quite anti-OOP.
I seem to recall something like that. But I didn't realise that this was such like a widely viewed kind of opinion. It seems a lot of people actually have this unpopular opinion.
There are parts of it that I do agree with.
And I'm thinking, like, what is your alternative? Like, functional? Is that the alternative to OOP?
Well, procedural. I suppose just not OOP.
Surely procedural is like lower on the list than OOP, though, right?
I think the problem with OOP is doing OOP for everything, or having an object-oriented approach to problems that don't need object-oriented solutions purely because you're using a very object-oriented language, or that's because the only way you think about things. I think that can be problematic.
See, I just don't know if I agree with that.
See, I think the argument that I quite like is there's a lot of times you're creating an object-oriented piece of code and you are using objects, but they shouldn't be objects. So helper classes, right? A really good example of things that don't need to be an object because they will only be called... You'll only have one object of this helper class. And it doesn't need to maintain its state or anything. It's just like printing to the console, or it's reading in a file or something. That doesn't need to have a whole class dedicated to it. It's
I'd
really
say
unnecessary.
In what you've just described now, a helper class as an object, that's anti-OOP anyway, you know? That wouldn't make sense to have a helper class as an object. You would put those methods onto your objects, I guess. But I've been through this with you before about how helper classes are like an anti-pattern, I find, especially when it comes to object-oriented programming, because those methods are more likely better placed somewhere else rather than in a helper class.
Yes, I suppose.
So I don't know if a helper class is a good example.
Maybe. I still think back to when we were doing Java in the first year, and they were doing the stereotypical kind of, this is how you do OOP, and it's always like cats and dogs or animals of some kind, and it works really well as objects. You know that animals are objects, and they have parent objects, and they have child objects, and there's inheritance, and it's like a really excellent way to think about it. But when you're actually presented with a problem, you almost have to force it into this object nature when things are much more ethereal. They're not actually objects that you'd imagine in real life.
I mean, I feel like with the project I've been working on, I feel like everything will naturally fit into these objects. You know?
Yeah, no, I think there might be some extremists that think you should never have anything object-orientated. But I think there are definitely some, and probably a lot of times when it's useful, it's just not always the best solution.
With the alternative being...
functional, maybe, or just... I think just not all OOP. Everything has to be... Think about what we're doing at the moment with the advent of code, and sorting out in Python procedurally, very quick. Doing it with Java or a language that is heavily object-orientated, it would take so much extra coding to sort out, okay, here are the classes, here are the methods, and it would be so large rather than just doing something quickly and procedurally.
Yeah, I mean, the type of stuff we're doing there is very scripty though, right? And,
yeah.
And writing scripts is more procedural than, object-oriented most of the time, I'd say.
Yes, yeah, I agree.
So it makes sense to write these kind of things in a procedural way. If you're making a web app, then it probably makes more sense to be a bit more oopy about it than procedural.
I think even making a web, there's, I think we found this when we were using Spring Boot, in that actually having to make everything in classes and objects doesn't feel right at all the time. There's a lot of times where you only have one instance of an object, and that doesn't it doesn't feel like it's harnessing any of the power of object orientation.
I don't know if this is a Spring problem though, or a OOP problem, Because I think a lot of issues with like how Spring worked with objects and stuff. And then
Maybe.
compare that to how I'm working with objects in Laravel, completely different experience.
Is everything an object in your Laravel app?
Well, I've got like user objects, post objects, media objects.
Right.
I don't actually have that many objects. I think I've got like 5 or 6 classes like of that type of like that are models in the system.
Yeah.
It's not that many, but mine's quite a simple app, I guess. But I feel like everything naturally fits into a model object.
Okay.
I mean,
okay. Who knows? Maybe I'm wrong, but
I can appreciate the functional way of doing things as well, and I think there is more of a move to that these days. Kind of the idea as well. I don't know if you've seen this, but of like actions. So there's like this idea now, which I'm seeing a lot in the Laravel world, of kind of moving away from having your controller, which has multiple methods on it for your HTTP verbs, right? You with me?
Yeah.
I'm moving away from that to just having like an action class for each verb, basically.
What does that mean?
So if you had in your HTTP controller for like one of your objects, say you had a method to just show one of your resources, right?
Yeah, okay.
You'd have, instead of having that as just a method on the controller, you'd have an action for, which is like a separate class of its own, single responsibility, which only is for showing that resource. You'd have another action to update a resource, another one to store, to delete, you know?
Okay.
So it's the idea of like separating your actions into different classes instead of having one controller with many methods. I haven't really looked into it as something I'd want to do yet. I don't know if I want to do it, but it is interesting to me.
I don't see the benefits as much. It just seems kind of the same but slightly different.
I think it's like the separation and the modularity of it, you know?
But why is that important?
I mean, I'm not an advocate of it, Adam, so you're asking the wrong person there. I think it is important just to like simplify the code, you know? You can more easily organize things because each class has one responsibility. Rather than using controllers, your class has multiple responsibilities, you know, up to like 7, I think, is what happens when you generate a resource control in Laravel. So for all your different actions. So I can definitely see how it could make sense. Sometimes your controllers can become quite large. And then you have this big class with multiple methods on it. That you can definitely see how that could be separated up, right?
Right.
And that could make more sense. I don't know. We haven't experimented with it. It's just something I've seen out there. And that is a more functional kind of way to think of it, I guess. When I watched the video earlier of these unpopular opinions...
Yeah, okay.
Just as like a quick little thing to maybe wrap this up now, I was wondering... It made me think about what unpopular opinions I had. Yeah. And I was wondering if you had any unpopular opinions as well.
Well, give me yours and I'll have a think.
So, my first one is my most controversial, possibly.
Oh, okay.
We've talked about this before. I don't know if you know if I want to talk about this with you, Adam, because it can sometimes get heated.
No, I'm ready.
But you already know this of me, but I don't think that PHP is as bad as a lot of people say it is.
Yeah, I mean, I agree.
I think on the
languages
web,
are tools.
On the web these days, I feel like you see so much hate for like 3-ish languages all the time.
Yes.
Do you know what those languages are that I'm thinking of out of interest?
PHP, JavaScript. Can't give you a third.
I definitely see a lot of hate for like PHP and JavaScript all the time.
Yes. I don't think these are serious though. I mean, certainly I don't see them as serious.
They are a bit more memey, I guess, than serious. Yeah. But you do see it all the time. And I do wonder, is this just because the majority of the web is powered by PHP and JavaScript?
I think it's because... Well, I mean, I don't know... I think that the complaints of JavaScript are just like... It's a bit illogical sometimes. I think PHP is viewed as a bit more hacky, right? But back in the day, anyone could like write up a web app with PHP, and it would be god awful in any aspect. But I think actually that's quite an old view, because things like Python are similar in their pick up and play attitude, and I really don't think that's a problem, right? There shouldn't be some kind of elitist view of programming languages. I think that going back to, you said there's 3, and I think the third one's probably VB, right?
Well, I don't. I feel like there's a lot of others that actually fit into the third slot that I see hate for randomly. I'm wondering if people just hate like all programming languages.
Yes, I think that's the case. I think I feel that way as well. I hate.
I think the issue though there is that there's always problems in every programming language. There's no such thing as a perfect language, right?
Yeah.
Every language has problems. And coming back to PHP, a lot of the problems that people bring up about PHP are ones from very old versions. It's on PHP 8 now. PHP 8.1 was released very recently. And it's like, I think PHP 8 is such a good language now. It still has problems. Obviously, every language has problems. There's no perfect language out there. But I just and I can agree with what you're saying as well. I probably think it is because of that scripty kind of nature that PHP has, which is similar to Python.
Yeah.
But put PHP in a framework like Laravel, and what an exciting world that is that you've just created,
Yeah, I mean, I think my problems about it are purely syntactic, right?
Mm-hmm.
That sometimes it's just quite ugly.
I mean, I can probably think of every programming language I know. I can probably think of a problem or something I don't like about it.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a perfect one.
Yeah, and it's more to do with us being incompetent, right? Than a language being problematic. I don't know why you think I'd have strong opinions against you on this one.
No, and I think you have grown in that respect, because I think
being talked down to.
In first year, I don't think you'd have had that opinion.
No, I think I did have this opinion, but it was just funny to insult the fact that you use PHP.
Well, this is
still
is the thing.
Right? I stand by that.
But is it funny though?
Yeah, I mean, if you see someone on their CV, right, PHP developer, Christ.
I read at some point that 80% of the web is powered by PHP.
Yeah.
And
no, I mean, that is true.
It is true, I think. I don't have the reference to back it up right now.
No, but I mean, it feels true, because it's a lot of just random sites that were created 40 years ago.
Yes. And I think the underlying thing I believe about it though is that the language just it isn't important to what you do. You'd never visit a website and you're like, I'm so glad this was written in JavaScript and not PHP.
Yeah.
A user never cares about the programming language, obviously, that you use.
Yeah.
That's just something that affects the developer experience. But, massive websites have been made off the back of PHP. A lot of them, Facebook, Wikipedia, and it's not like the user cares that it's written in PHP. It doesn't matter. So at the end, it's just it's the language you prefer that matters. What do you want to use? It doesn't matter what anyone else uses. Does it really?
No, I agree.
Something else I was thinking, I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion, but it's something that I kind of experience a lot, is people I feel like people, not that they expect their code to be error-free, but when they get an error, it kind of throws them off completely. And for me, the majority of programming is you're just looking at error messages all the time, and that's fine.
Yeah, Ryan, I mean, I'm going to have to call bullshit on you saying that these are unpopular opinions. These are very popular opinions. The fact that you spend 80% of your time debugging is not a surprise.
I think for some people it might be,
Maybe people that are newer to the role.
I think especially if you're new to programming, you would be thrown off by having all these errors. you might think you're a bad programmer. But this is the reality, is that you kind of just, you have an error message, you look it up, you solve it, you move on to the next one. And it just repeats forever, and that's the developer life.
And I think that's going back to this. I think that's why the more automation of the coding process with Copilot or things similar to that will be beneficial, right? Because it's normally you know the solution to your problem. It's just getting the syntax right and getting it, for the computer to understand and parse.
That being said,
should be made smoother.
Earlier in Racket, everything that it was producing for me did not run. And you had an experience yesterday with that with Python, right, where it produced some code for you that didn't run.
Yes.
So not really completely reliable there. But
I think the move to that will smooth that out, hopefully, in the future.
You think you would lessen it, do you?
Yeah, hopefully. That's what I'm thinking.
Do you have any unpopular opinions to share?
So I think my unpopular opinion is a distaste for server-side rendering and MVC modeling.
Okay.
I think now I'm going back to the first episode of this podcast. You may remember that I was trying to have a server-side rendered app. So I'm not hugely, but in principle, I like the separation of client and server. Right, I like that anyone could be switched out for another. Right, providing they understand the communication between them.
Yep.
I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion, but I don't think it's a modern opinion. I think you've mentioned before that this is quite an old school way of thinking.
Yeah, I don't think this is an unpopular opinion, especially now. The kind of separation between client and server is quite well used these days, I feel, right?
I don't know. With things like Laravel, what is the... Because
how, like, if you use...
Blade files.
Yes, if you use Laravel without, like, using Vue or Inertia or something else, like, with it, you will just be using Blade files, which are server-side rendered.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is a benefit to that, which is server-side rendering is better for search engine optimization.
Yes.
So
yes, I have heard that. That is actually the reason that I was going to use Nuxt.
Because I'm using Inertia.js, which is like a glue, I guess, between your client and your server. It's quite hard to explain it, so look it up, if you're interested in it. But it has like a server-side rendering option for like sponsors only. I think it is going to be like non-sponsor in the future. I think it's still on its like version 0 point something release, It's quite new.
Right.
As Inertia.js as a whole, I mean. But it does have like a server-side rendering thing that it's that it has as like a sponsors only type thing. So that you can, instead of you having to generate the view on the client side, you can do it on the server side and then send that over. So it basically starts like a little node server to do that.
Okay.
The benefit of it is it does improve your SEO. Don't know. That's I guess is about it though.
Yeah, I think that there are some benefits to having a very homogeneous monolith code base, right? And it does everything all in one repository, front end, back end. There is no need for an API to maintain. It just sorts it out itself. But I
suppose it depends on what type of app you're making though, right? Because it's nice to do it all in one like that, yes. But perhaps if you're making like an API that you want to be consumed by the public, not just by your own apps, then that kind of separation between API and client makes a lot more sense suddenly, right?
Yeah.
So it depends on what type of app you're making, I feel.
Yeah, I think you're right.
with what you said about MVC as well, my third point was about that the monolith is the way forward.
Yes, I have heard you say this for a while now.
So what is your point about not liking MVC then? And what's the alternative?
I'd say I don't really know the alternative. MVC is most of the way we've done the development of web apps. It just doesn't give me warm fuzzy feelings.
See, I get a lot of warm fuzzy feelings from it.
Do you?
Yeah. It makes lots of sense in my brain. Nice separation between, the database layer, your business logic, and your UI. I like that. There are other models, not just MVC, that you can look at, but MVC makes lots of sense in my brain.
Yeah. It's not the way I'm going with my development at the moment.
Well, that hasn't started yet, has it?
No, but the plan in my head, there isn't going to be any sort of models or anything. It's just going to be simple calls to a database.
Oh, like raw in your controllers, or you not having controllers?
I think it's just going to be an API, right? Effectively. So it's just going to be controllers.
Okay.
There is going to be no view or models.
Because your view is going to be handled in a client-side app, you mean?
Yeah, it is, yeah. I don't know if there's going to be... There is a name for that.
What, so
an API?
On your server side, are you just going to have, raw SQL in your API calls?
It won't be SQL because it's not SQL. It's DynamoDB, which is not SQL.
Okay.
It will just be API calls to the DynamoDB server.
I mean, that seems interesting. I wonder if that would be, very efficient and optimized,
I mean, the backend shouldn't be too large because it doesn't really need to be.
Yes, compare it to the backend, say, of my project, which is going to be quite large.
Yeah.
But swings and roundabouts,
Yes, I mean, I don't know if does my design have a name there? Do you know what that would be called?
I don't know. That's that's just kind of very simple kind of design, though, right? You'd have to look up this, but it's certainly not MVC.
No, it's not.
Yeah, and it's probably not object oriented either.
No.
You could maybe say it's functional if you have in each function is an API call.
It's probably just going to be procedural. I don't think it'll be functional. I mean, it's written in JavaScript, so I don't know how functional you can be.
I feel very functional in JavaScript.
Can you not? Certainly not as functional as Racket.
No.
That's
nothing
very
like
functional.
Racket, but you can definitely be functional in JavaScript. And that would
I suppose you could be functional, but it's not a functional language.
It would probably make a lot of sense for your app to be functional if all your server side is just a load of API calls. Each API call is a function.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
There will be some small amount of logic inside of it, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds interesting. I'd like to see it at some point.
It'll definitely be done at some point, as you can expect.
Well, I was hoping to see it this week, so hopefully you'll have something to show me next week instead.
Yes, I apologise, Ryan. What I will have is more advent of code challenges.
I'll have to finish mine in Python and.
No, come on. At least your new language today.
But I wanted us to use the same all the way through,
Yeah. And
if you're going to do Racket, I'll just use Python or Node just to finish this one off today.
Yeah, I don't think I'll be able to do Racket.
I think I'm just gonna have Node and Python as my backup languages if the one I wanted to use today doesn't work out for me.
Yeah. It is upsetting though, I wanted to say.
It's very upsetting. But what can you do, Adam? I can't spend all day learning Racket.
Ryan. You've got to fail fast.
Exactly. You've got to fail fast. Racket didn't work out for me, move on.
Yeah.
maybe I should do another language, but I've already done part 1 in Python, so that's too late for today.
Yeah, okay.
We'll revisit tomorrow.
We'll come back to it.
What language are you thinking for tomorrow?
I mean, I thought your recommendation of assembly was serious. Is it not?
Absolutely not. Especially after using Racket, I need something simple for tomorrow.
Go?
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, I don't know anything about it, but
it's C-like, not schema-like.
That's what I need after today.
Yeah, bit of curly braces.
Yeah.
I think we'll sign off.
Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Goodbye.